Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer Friday afternoon briefing with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Patrick McPartlin. And what has been, well, I have to say, a notable week in the history of Hibernian FC. The departures announced of Lewis Stevenson and Paul Hanlon after a few decades of service between them at the club. Yeah, and on top of that, obviously, as well, women's captain Joelle Murray also calling time on her career as well. So it's been quite a week, for emotional goodbyes. Patrick, how have you been holding up through all this?
It's been interesting. I think it's that the day is going to come eventually. But I think it's like I said on Twitter during the week. It's going to be really, really strange seeing, well, not only a men's Hibs team without one of Stevenson or Hanlon in it, but also like a women's team without Joelle Murray in the defence. It's just, it's. I mean, what was it? Something like I think it's 500 games for Joelle, and then obviously you've got more than 1,100 for Paul and Lewis. That's a lot of games. It's a lot of minutes. And there's people out there who haven't known a Hibs team without Paul and Lewis in it. Haven't known a Hibs women team without Joelle in it. And I think when you consider what the three of them do for the club and what they bring to the club off the field, as well as what they bring on it, it's seismic, huge sort of huge changes for both teams. If a little inevitable, I think on both parts, these things come to an end. But I think having all three of them announcing, obviously in Paul and Lewis's case, that they'll be moving on in the summer, and Joelle's stepping back from playing. So it was quite a week for sort of earth-shattering announcements of a Hibernian persuasion.
Yeah, absolutely. These departures will kind of form the main focus of the show, but we'll also kind of dissect Nick Montgomery's press conference, a few kind of newsy bits and pieces in there, and look ahead to our Sunday game this week for Hibs at home to Aberdeen. I'm quite pleased with myself that I didn't say Saturday's game. Every time they're playing a Sunday, I always get that wrong. What's a point to me? But first, folks, just a quick word for our sponsor before we get started. We are thrilled to have Weissman, a global leader in the boiler industry, known for their top-notch German engineering, sponsor our podcast. They've teamed up with Scotland's very own award-winning installation team, MPH Boilers, making this a perfect match right here in Scotland. Weissman's boilers are engineered to deliver not just warmth, but unparalleled efficiency and reliability. It's cutting-edge technology designed to save you on your energy bills and reduce emissions as well. And with MPH Boilers, you're getting service from the best in the business. They're a local team that's committed to excellence and to customer satisfaction. So when you choose a Weissman boiler installed by MPH Boilers, you'll also get a free internet controller so you can manage your heating anytime, anywhere. And you'll also be offered the first year's service free. It's all about giving you peace of mind and making sure that you're looked after. So if your boiler's showing its age or you're considering an upgrade, this is your chance to get world-class engineering with local expert service. Weissman and MPH Boilers, it's a match made in Scotland. Make sure to check them out and take the first step towards a warmer, more efficient home. So, back to it. As I said, only really one place to start. Paul Hanlon and Lewis Stevenson announcing their kind of joint departure from Hibs, a real kind of landmark moment in the history of the club. Two incredible servants. Patrick, I'm going to ask you a difficult question and try to sum up what Lewis Stevenson and Paul Hanlon mean to Hibernian FC. Take all the time you need.
I think that could take quite a long time. I think they're both. They obviously have their similarities in terms of what they bring as these sort of defensive stalwarts who've kind of given years of service to the club. But I think the difference in Paul Hanlon being a Hibs fan as a boy and sort of coming through the academy to then go on to captain the team. Obviously slightly different from Lewis Stevenson, who kind of ended up at the club after growing up in Fife, but has basically become sort of part of the fabric, part of the furniture. And just in such emphatic fashion as well. Not only winning the League Cup, but then the Scottish Cup, and to date the only Hibs player to have ever managed that. And I think it's especially with Lewis. I mean, he's had his detractors over the years, and probably himself as well, to be honest, because he is very much a kind of self-deprecating kind of guy. And I think he'd be the first person to say. I think he used to say quite a lot. This is probably going to be my last season, and he's been saying that for years. So to still be sort of turning out performances, after he's turned 36 is, I think, testament to just his standing as a player, as a teammate, as just a person, I suppose. I think when you look at Hibs on the whole, you don't really have as many players there now as you used to have who really got what it meant to play for the club, to play for the badge. And I think that's problematic. Obviously, these things, time moves on, players move on, these things have to change. But it is, I think, at this point in the sort of the history of Hibs, it's now more than ever that you really need sort of characters who get what it means to play for the club. I'm not saying there aren't any, because I think when you have players like Chris Cadden, Joe Newell, I think would be the obvious ones. Martin Boyle as well, given how long he's been at the club, and they get it. But I think just having characters like Stevenson and Hanlon, who've been there through the numerous lows and the not too many highs, I think you really it really can't be sort of overstated just how important it is having players like that. So I think their departure means there is obviously room in the dressing room for people to step up and kind of take on that role, or those roles, if you like, of kind of being the sort of Mr. Hibs characters in the dressing room, in the squad. And I think it's difficult, because there'll be a lot of Hibs fans out there who are sorry to see them go, but will also probably agree that it is time for them to move on, because it's very possible to sort of outstay your welcome in all walks of life. And I think Paul and Lewis would probably be the first to say that they wouldn't want to be still playing if they couldn't contribute at the highest level. I think both of them probably feel they could, given how little they played this season, they might feel they've got another season under their belts at Hibs at least. But if they move on, they could play for another 2, maybe 3 years, elsewhere. And I think it's difficult to deny them that opportunity. And I think just a really difficult moment for not only the players but probably the club to, sort of think, well, we're going in this different direction. We need, we need to bring in better players for your positions. And I think if you look over the years, the number of times that Hibs could have and should have sorted out the defence, particularly the central defence, and because you had Paul Hanlon there putting in 7 out of 10 performances every week, probably his strength kind of didn't really help Hibs, in the sense that if he deteriorated earlier, then they could have said, right, we're going to bring somebody in to replace you. But because he just continued churning out good performances at the back, we saw how well Will Fish played last season alongside Paul Hanlon. I don't really think Fish has been quite the same this season. I mean, there's obviously a lot of factors affecting that, and certainly not it's not a criticism of Rocky Bashiri, for example, who Fish has been playing alongside for much of the season. But I just think having someone with Hanlon's experience and just his knowledge of the game, his knowledge of Hibs, being able to talk a younger player through the game, what to do, when to do it, how to do it, it's just invaluable. So I think it's going to be a sad day when they run out for the last time at Easter Road against Motherwell next week. Like I say, it can't be overstated what they've sort of brought to the club, what they've done for the club, and it's off field as well as on the field. But at the same time, it's one of those things where I think it probably is the right time for both to go their separate ways, even though it's kind of difficult to accept that. I think I saw someone on social media likening it to a sort of type of breakup where you agree that it's best for both of you to go your separate ways even if you don't want to. So yeah, I think that's not a bad bit to end that section on. So
yeah, as I said, you've been covering Hibs for a lot longer than I have, but even in kind of the brief time that I've been covering the club, you do get a sense of just how kind of important figures that that Hanlon and Stevenson are. It's not just kind of what they do on the pitch. It's well, obviously it is, but there's always this kind of vague concept in football of guys who people say, oh, they get it, they get the club. And I think like 9 times out of 10, sometimes it can just boil down to a guy who shouts and balls an awful lot and runs about. But I think in Hanlon and Stevenson, you sort of touched on it as well. Like they're obviously, as players, and the effort that they give. They probably kick the last ball the same way they did the first ball at Hibs, but it's just like they almost become an extension of the fan base in a way, because you touched on it earlier about being there through all these highs and lows, experiencing that, knowing exactly what that means to the fans, and obviously it's just kind of how they, maybe how they've conducted themselves as well. I think you'd probably be really hard pushed to find anybody in football who would have a bad word to say about Paul Hanlon or Lewis Stevenson. And again, as you said earlier on, it might only be Lewis Stevenson who has bad things to say about Lewis Stevenson. He's a very kind of self-deprecating, humble character, but even kind of dealing with him just on the odd occasion at press conferences and stuff, you kind of get the measure of what, always very courteous for their time. Really kind of, they speak well, articulate, intelligent guys, obviously great players as well. So yeah, as I said a wee bit there, it's like they are kind of, these guys become extensions of the fans, and maybe they sort of see themselves and these guys a wee bit, and that's what always hits that bit harder when they decide to move on. So I'm sure there'll not be a dry eye in the house when the time comes at Easter Road next week. I think they would have probably, the two of them will have had it maybe in their head for a while that this day was going to come. They probably just didn't think it was going to be a Wednesday night. So that's kind of, it's maybe a slightly strange aspect to it. But as I said, it will be a kind of an emotional moment, and hopefully they get the send off that they deserve. And it also looks like Lewis Stevenson's going to pass that 600 appearances mark, which is quite incredible. So in terms of farewells, we've mentioned it earlier on, Joelle Murray deciding to retire from the Hibs women's team. So just a word, for the contribution that she's made to the women's team over the years. Obviously, a bit of a pioneer in many ways. The amount of appearances that she's made as well, an incredible trophy haul. So again, it's a kind of seismic event in the world of Hibernian.
Yeah, and I think when you think about Hibs women over the years, and she's talked about it herself, going from like hand-me-down kits from the men's first team to walking out against Bayern Munich at Easter Road in the Champions League. Like, it's the women's game's obviously come on leaps and bounds. While she's been playing, she's kind of been at the forefront of just kind of growing from being almost a bit of a joke in terms of the attention it was getting, and the sort of money that was put in or not put into it, and the fact that it's now become kind of like an integral part of the game in Scotland, rather than just sort of like an afterthought. And I just think when you look at what Joelle does for Hibs, and I find myself wondering how she has any time for anything else, because between obviously playing for the women's team, training, I think she's been doing coaching work as well with the women's team. She's sort of like head of the junior academy, I think it is, and it's just basically you sort of think all these things that she does, Hibs kids and everything. It's like, how has she got any time to do anything else? And I think it's just that you talk about, and obviously a sort of childhood Hibs fan as well. Growing up playing for the club, and some really big moments. You look at the silverware she's picked up as well in terms of league titles, league cups, Scottish cups. I mean, it's quite sort of striking. Just to have that longevity and just a heck of a lot of trophies in and Scotland caps, European appearances in what's been like a really kind of stellar career. At the sort of top of the women's game, and you talk about having players who just get it, and she's just one of them. I think she just gets it. She knows what it means to play for Hibs, and I mean, you look especially with the women's game more so than the men's game. There's a constant churn of players. Every sort of season, just because of the way contracts work. You've obviously got sort of like part-time, full-time, players and how that works. But to have someone like Joelle sort of, greeting you in your first day and saying, right, this is Hibs, this is what we expect, this is the minimum, this is how things, happen here. Invaluable, and very much a sort of, I mean, I look at it as her having the same sort of influence, the same kind of standing with the Hibs women team as Paul and Lewis do with the men's team. Just that, kind of Madam Hibs. Just a really, I suppose, like a kind of figurehead, really, just really.
Yeah.
I mean, people say, like, legend is obviously overused in football. We use legend to describe a midfielder who scored a half-decent goal on a Saturday sometimes. a well overused word, but I think in the sense that in the case of sort of Murray, in the case of Hanlon, Stevenson, like icons does seem appropriate just because of what they've done in their careers, what they've brought to Hibs, what they've done on and off the pitch. And I think it's good for Hibs women that she is going to be sticking around as part of Grant Scott's backroom staff. I think it's good for the club that she's still going to be doing everything she's been doing off the pitch. And I just think spoke before about the club needing players who get it, and there not really being too many left. And I think when you consider it's been a bit of a turbulent season in terms of results, performances, not finishing in the top 6. And you look at the managerial kind of changes over the past 3 or 4 years. I think there's a lot of fans out there probably look at their departure as being like another sign that the club is maybe stepping away from what it used to be for them. And I think that that's when it becomes really important that you've got people sort of stepping up in their absence. That you've got players who can make the fans sort of, I suppose, sort of like feel that connection with the club again or with the team again. Because I think that's something that's been missing. We've talked about this apathy that a large section of the fan base seems to have now, which hasn't been helped by performances on the pitch. And the off-field stuff is great, hospitality, commercial infrastructure, all going really well. Doesn't really matter a jot to a lot of fans unless the first team is doing well on a Saturday or a Sunday. So, I think it's really important that there are players who can step up and sort of like take on those roles. I mean, you look at the women's team, Siobhan Hunter is an obvious example there, Rachel Boyle, another one.
Yep.
Experienced players who know exactly what it means to play for the team, to play for the badge, to wear the shirt. And, I think there are some candidates in the men's team as well. But it does feel like, it is going to be a big summer of change for the men's team. And I think, you really need those players who get it to kind of step up and, just a bit of leadership, I suppose, at a time when, the club sort of really needs it. And what Hanlon, Stevenson and Murray have given to the club over the years has been, that sort of like hard work, leadership, and essentially just becoming ambassadors for the club. And, obviously all good things come to an end. And I think now is just an opportunity for, a few new faces to step up and do the same.
Yeah, definitely. A kind of distinct theme of departures about today's video. So we're going to move on now and talk about what Nick Montgomery had to say at his press conference yesterday. And I suppose the the standout line was, I know it was reported last week, I think, in the Daily Record, I think, that Adam Lafondra was going to be moving on. Nick Montgomery confirmed it yesterday at his press conference, and what must have been a crushing blow to a regular contributor on here, Craig Nisbet, 9125 Analysis. He's disseminated some real strong Adam Lafondra propaganda on these videos. So, Craig, I promise if you're watching, we'll get you on soon for a wee kind of, I don't know how to put it, a wee therapy session for looking like Adam Lafondra moving on. You surprised by that one? Do you think it was... He's come in. He's done a good job when fit, Adam Lafondra. But again, there's there just seems to be a real desire for a clean slate heading into next season. And obviously, Lafondra, he's still very capable, but he is kind of getting towards that late 30s stage now. Was it always just going to be a one season thing? Do you think?
I'm not so sure. I think there was a time when, we talk about characters at clubs and how important that can be, as well as what you're contributing on the pitch. And I think even last Saturday in Dingwall, granted it was a defeat, but when you saw the way Lafondra played when he came on, just such an intelligent guy, like his movement, just, everything. Just obviously a player, who has played at the top level and still has it. And I suppose I thought, a few weeks back, I thought, I think the club had an option for like another 12 months. Mm-hmm. And I thought, provided the player wants to stay, that looks like being a really sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
Just to have someone who can kind of be that sort of older head in the dressing room. Because if you think about who's leaving, you've got Hanlon leaving, you've got Stevenson leaving. There's questions about, whether David Marshall's going to be here next season. And, I think, there is obviously this desire to get the average age of the squad down. I think when you look at it this season, it has been, even with the influx of 16 and 17-year-olds, it has been, towards the upper end of the scale on occasion. But I just think someone with his experience, and we've spoken to the likes of Dylan Vente, we've spoken to some of the other attackers just about what Le Fondre's has done for them in terms of helping them, doing like little bits of coaching with them, and that's that's something I thought they just would have been really keen to keep on. But I mean, obviously it could depend on the player. The player might fancy going back down south to to where he's originally from, or maybe it was just one of those things where they can't guarantee him as much game time as he might like. And he's been really pragmatic this season, I think, when he's been talking about the role that he plays, that he sees himself as still being fit enough to start, but also saying he's happy to come off the bench and sort of have an impact, and he has done that on a few occasions. But I think the injury didn't do him any favors. I think you want your players to be available as much as possible, and obviously just a freak thing by the sounds of it. But I think that probably was playing at the back of Nick Montgomery's mind as well. He needs to have his players available as much as possible. Otherwise, if they're not contributing, then it's it sort of becomes difficult to sort of make the case for keeping them. And I suppose as well, you look at the size of the squad. There's a lot of players there. There are a lot of players between the first team squad, players out on loan. It's it's really bloated at the moment, and they really need to they need to try and sort of trim that any way they can. And I think they're probably you've got a player who's out of contract who can move on in the summer for free. There's not that issue of trying to find a buyer, trying to if it's a younger player, you send them on loan again. What do you do? So in some ways, it's an easy fix for trimming numbers or contributing to trimming numbers. But I think and fully expect Craig to be coming on and saying this in a lot more sort of tactical background. But I just think what he brought to the squad was something that had been missing. We always say every season how useful it is to have a player who can sort of talk the youngsters through it, who's been there, done it. And I think that's ultimately why he was brought in, just that sort of experienced head up front, but also the fact that he's still, he scored goals everywhere he's been, just been, like I say, really hampered by the injury. So I suppose I can see why he's not sticking about, but on a personal level, I thought he might have been a good one for like another 12 months. But like I say, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. It might have been a mutual thing. It might have been a change in circumstances. But I think a little bit surprised, but again, can see the logic behind it.
See both sides, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, I think I do agree with you. I thought he was certainly worth keeping around, especially if that option in the contract was already there for another year. So I mean, Nick Montgomery didn't elaborate too much on the reasons. He maybe sort of hinted a wee bit, and maybe just kind of thinking back on it now, he did make a point of saying that Le Fondre's family didn't come up to Edinburgh with him, that they still live down south. So it's maybe, it could be easy hinting at, I don't want to speculate too much, but he could be hinting at something there that he maybe wants to go and live back down south again. Because I mean, I doubt he'll be short of an offer or two somewhere in the EFL, perhaps. So maybe again, that could have been the reason that he's maybe decided, maybe another year. And he's probably kind of hearing about, he'll probably have looked for at least some assurances, you'd think, on playing time. And with the amount of change that's coming this summer, I just don't think, I mean, Hibs are really in a position to offer anybody guaranteed weekly starts at the moment. Do you know what I mean? With the amount of change that's going to come, with the amount of players I think that are going to come in over the summer. So, I mean, while I do agree, absolutely, definitely, I thought it would have been a player that was worth keeping around. I'm maybe wondering now if Nick Montgomery was just hinting that there was maybe a hint of Le Fondre wanting to head back down to England where his family still are. So who knows? We might hear from him before the end of the season, and he might get to tell his side of it. But for now, it looks, although Montgomery did say it's not been finalised yet, it says it does look very likely that Adam would be moving on from the club. So again, Montgomery was also asked in the same vein, asked about David Marshall. Obviously, his another one whose contract is coming to an end at the end of the season, and he was saying, we're going to sit down with David and thrash that out after the sort of last ball of the season's been kicked, and then take it from there. I'm sure there has to have been, I think, at least some informal discussions, if not, anything tabled or anything. Right, this is the direction we want to go in. I would feel that there has to have been some sort of discussion. But is it the fact that if they're not finalising anything until the end of the season, does it maybe suggest that if Marshall is to stay on, it would maybe as a backup role moving forward, would Hibs be looking to bring in a new goalkeeper? Because I just think the impression I got when Montgomery was speaking, there was maybe that if he was going to be the number one for next season, then it was probably something you'd think they'd have thrashed out already, something that would be finalised. So I just wonder if it's maybe could come down to the player. Does he want to go and try and play somewhere every single week, or accept a sort of reduced role? And again, it's that experience thing that you said, keeping around guys who can help others, and especially when there's I'm kind of diverging for the point a wee bit here, but especially when we keep saying there is going to be so much change, so you do need, I think, at least some level of continuity, guys that have been around the block enough times, not just at Hibs, but kind of through their entire careers. I'll have seen periods of transition. How do you get new guys through that? You kind of want to have some level of just those kind of people around to help you through it. So again, Marshall, hard to say what's going to happen there, but I do think it certainly was my impression that if he was going to be the number one next season, I thought maybe Nick Montgomery wouldn't have said it in the way he said it, that we'll sort it at the end of the season. It's as if, maybe Marshall's not made up his mind as to what he wants to do yet. Wildly speculating here. It's just I was sitting reading those comments again after the press conference yesterday and trying to kind of fathom out what try to read between the lines of it. And if you've just listened to me for the past couple of minutes, you'll have concluded that I didn't manage to decipher anything at all, really. But again, it's just hard to say what way it's going to go.
It is, and I think it is the season for wild speculation. So
yeah, it's what it's all about, isn't it? It's what it's all about.
Give the public what they want. But no, I do think it's difficult, because I think you look at managers, especially at this end of the season, and you think, well, how much of what they're saying is, the complete truth? How much of it is just sort of what they're saying to the media, and it's a different story behind closed doors, and how much of it is, I don't know, just obfuscation, if you like. I agree with you. I think that if Hibs were going into next season with David Marshall as the sort of number one pick for goalkeeper, I think it would have been communicated by now. I think it would have been sort of signed, sealed, delivered. I don't think that's going to be the case. Things can change very quickly in a short space of time in football, as we know. But I would be very surprised if Hibs have designs on having David Marshall as their first choice next season. I think that I've seen a lot of comments about him this season, and I think it's maybe born from the sort of overall sort of under par performance from the team as a whole across the season. I don't think there's any doubt that he's been a heck of a lot better this season than he was last season. Mm-hmm. Just, when you compare, and I know there's people out there who absolutely hate it when we get into the stats, but, I'm going to do that. When you look at his numbers on StatsBomb, in terms of the save percentage, and granted, I haven't looked at it recently, so it might have changed, but broadly speaking, he was performing, a lot better than he was expected to this season. In terms of his sort of, there's a stat called, I think, saves above average, something like that. Expected saves above average, something like that. Somebody will be along and tell me in the comments that I've got it wrong, and I'm a disgrace, but I'll deal with that. But essentially, just pointing out that he's saving more shots than he's expected to, which ultimately is a good thing. Especially when you consider how unsettled the defence has been at times, and this. You look at the number of late goals Hibs have lost, and there's not too many that you can sort of say, well, that's David Marshall's fault. And I think it's really interesting to compare what goalkeeping coach Miguel Miranda did with Danny Vukovic at Central Coast Mariners, who's a sort of similar age to Marshall, and kind of reinvented him almost. When he arrived at Central Coast and sort of took over the goalkeeping coaching, Vukovic became a really important part of the team. Very similar with Marshall, by all accounts, his distribution's improved, his overall sort of game's improved, and I think we've seen that with Marshall this season. I don't think that necessarily means great, give him another year, whatever. I mean, I can imagine that the conversation might have been something along the lines of we're prepared to offer you a new like 1 year deal, but you're not going to be a guaranteed starter. And because I think you talk about experience, he'd be a good person to have around the place. He'd be a sort of trusted pair of hands if he needed to step in. You look at what he's achieved in the game, it's a no-brainer. But I think when you look at the number of kind of wee niggly injuries he's had, and the fact that he was very kind of definitive in sort of retiring from international football, which I think was June. I think that was maybe just after he joined Hibs. Mm-hmm. And he sort of, it wasn't even a sort of like, I'm going to retire, but then I might think about coming back. It was a definitive sort of like, that's me done, which you have to imagine was to try and prolong his club career, which, I think he's done. But then if you look at the wee niggly injuries he's had this season, there's been quite a few of them. I mean, I'm struggling to remember a season where, Hibs had to sub their goalkeeper so much. And, it's obviously I'm not criticising Marshall for it. It's just one of these things that happens. But, I think you want your first choice goalkeeper to be, essentially fit and available for as many games as possible. And I think for that reason, they would go down the route of trying to bring somebody a bit younger, who's maybe a bit more, comfortable with playing out from the back. On that note, Marshall has done really well. I think to adapt his game, he's spoken about it himself. Nick Montgomery's spoken about it, that he's, despite the fact that he has been playing the game for the best part of 2 decades, it's become a common theme on this podcast today. But because he has played the game for so long, he's still willing to to adapt, to learn new things. But it's the same with other positions. You can't go into this. No, not really any room for sentiment. You can't just say, "Oh, well, we'll keep him on because he was okay," or we'll keep him on because he's won 2 cups and a first division title. So we keep them on doing something. The team has to get better. They have to get better on the pitch, and you have to make sometimes hard decisions as the manager, as the sort of club hierarchy, and how to move the team forwards and how to move the club forwards. And I think when you look at you've got Murray Johnson, which is another aspect. You don't want to block his pathway. If he's going to have a bigger part to play next season. So I think there's a lot to think about, but I think Marshall might be the sort of key here. I think he might be thinking, if I keep on playing, niggly injuries are only going to get worse. I'm only going to get more of them. He might sort of think this. It's a decent point to kind of bring an end to things. But I think, I'd be surprised if there's a turnaround on that, to be honest. Like I say, it wouldn't be surprised if there's been talks about him staying on in a kind of backup capacity, but I think it comes down to the player and not blocking the pathway of younger players. You've also got Max Borich as well, and Jojo Wallacott's still under contract, so obviously we're expecting a big summer. We don't know what's going to happen with a lot of players, but there's a heck of a lot to take into consideration. And I think like we were saying before with Lafondre, here's somebody who's out of contract, and it might be the easiest thing to just say, right, draw a line under it and move on.
Aye, true. Just finally, from the press conference just before we wrap things up, again, the other thing that I've just seen people discussing is there was quite a kind of long discussion within the presser within the presser yesterday, I feel like, with Montgomery, just about the size of the squad, how many players that there are under contract, the kind of reasons for that, the amount of players coming back on loan. He also touched on the kind of, he almost feels like it's a bit of an issue created by it's like the under 18s and then straight to the first team. There's not like that kind of bridge of an under 23s or development reserve side, as he called it, and he seems to just be on. He kind of feels that there's been a kind of accumulation of reasons as to why Hibs have got to this point, having so many players under contract. And I think when you say it out loud, like 18 players coming back on loan, kind of stops you in your tracks almost a wee bit. I know it's so many. Like, And I know some of those are, academy boys who will be coming back in, but then there's obviously a lot of senior players as well. And he talked about, having difficult conversations with guys, guys who are going to have to be moved on. And he sort of hinted that he would like a squad, ideally between 20 and 24 players. But I mean, I think it would be a big ask to not only to get the numbers down to that in one summer. I think it's a lot. It would be a huge job to do that over the course of one summer, especially if you've got players coming in as well, which there's going to have to be. So it's a big job, isn't it, to get the squad down to those kind of numbers? Save having to send guys out on loan again, but then you're keeping them around on the books for no real reason other than you can't offload them permanently. So it's a bit of a mountain to climb, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason we're saying it's going to be a big summer, and I think it can't be understated. How
quite literally.
Yeah, it's just going to be it's going to be fascinating to watch, to be honest, because I think there's going to be so much movement between, as you say, players coming back, players leaving, new players coming in, and it's a mammoth job. It's really. I mean, I'll go back to Lee Johnson saying that, you really need 3 or 4 transfer windows as a manager to put your stamp on a team. And I know it sounds like just, a pitch to, kind of please have as much time as possible before you try and sort of like nudge me out the door. But, I think there is a point to that, that you can't be expected to make so many changes in just one or even like 2 transfer windows. And I think the problem is that with the January transfer window, it's very much a kind of stick and plaster type window. It's what do we need to get us to the end of the season? Who can we move out between now and the end of the season, or for the second half of the season to sort of help us achieve our goals? And quite often you end up with kind of short-term loans and quick fixes, and then you're sort of back to square one in the summer. And I think, Hibs have kind of been this team squad in transition for so long, and I think we've spoken about this before. Montgomery did sort of cultivate this reputation at Mariners for kind of moving on players who'd been at a club for a set amount of time, but maybe weren't contributing as much as another player could, and that could be because he felt they weren't good enough because they couldn't adapt to the way he wanted to play, or simply because there's just players who might want more game time than he could offer. So many reasons. But it's just something that needs done. I think it's. We absolutely will have a podcast in the not too distant future, like looking at the squad and going through it, because it's just there's a heck of a lot there to unpack. But
yeah,
I think it's just. I think the squad has needed it for a while, but because of this constant change of managers, it's almost kind of getting pushed to the background. That it's like, right, well, we'll just the new guy can bring his players in and move some players on. Mm-hmm. But then you've got players who are signed by one manager who then aren't fancied by the next, and then the next manager comes in and he's sort of thinking, well, this was the guy 2 before me who's brought this player in, and this by that point the style of play could have moved on. You could have a better player in that position. There's just so many different factors affecting it, but I do think that especially with the Black Knights coming on board, Bill Foley, I think this, it could be this finally could be the summer where, we do see a lot of movement, we do see a lot of, tough decisions made, and a lot of players, probably moved on, brought in. I just think it's, it is going to be a big summer of change. I think it needs to be, and it will just, it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. Just over the course of the close season, because obviously. We're coming up to the end of the season, but it's not that far away that the sort of League Cup group stages start.
No, always creeps up, that, doesn't it? Always creeps right round the corner. That podcast you mentioned, just going over the squad, what it needs, that probably will be something in the region of a 3-hour special. Several parts to that one, so you might want to clear a bit of space in your week actually for that. But for now, we're going to leave it there. Covered lots today. Obviously, we get a game on Sunday to look forward to against Aberdeen, penultimate home game of the season as we go into the final stretch. Just in terms of content over the weekend, we get more press conference stuff on the way. You'll be able to hear from Chris Cadden and Lewis Stevenson over the next few days. So do keep an eye out for that on our website. If you've not subscribed to the Hibs Observer as of yet, then can I direct you to the ticker at the bottom of the screen. We're currently doing a £4 for 4 months offer on what we believe is the most in-depth Hibs content around. You get videos like these right through the week with different contributors. Obviously 9125 analysis, Craig Nisbet. We've also got Matty Fernie from the Long Bangers podcast on regularly. On top of that, pre and post match content, exclusive interviews. Just over the past few weeks, we've had Nathan Mariah Welsh, Scott Allen, and Pat Fenlon. Interviews with Hibs past and present is what I'm trying to say. Also got tactical analysis and everything else that you can imagine thrown in there. So if you haven't subscribed and you do like the look of what we do, then can I urge you to take up that £4 for 4 months offer, because we do really appreciate it. And if you're watching us on YouTube, if you can hammer that subscribe button, again, it helps us keep growing the channel, providing more and more videos as we go along. I'm going to leave it there for now because I have rabbited on for more than long enough. So as always, folks, thank you for joining us. I hope you have a good weekend and we will see you again soon. Cheers.